The town of Willowbrook was a small community nestled in a corner of the American Northeast. Beautiful scenery changed with the seasons, and the willow trees that bloomed with the arrival of spring were the origin of the town's name. Since moving to this town, Eleanor Mitchell's life had gradually been regaining a peaceful rhythm. "Liam, breakfast is ready." Eleanor called out to her son upstairs with a light voice from the kitchen that morning. She quickly poured maple syrup over the pancakes and added the last blueberry to the fruit assortment next to them. Eleanor wore her light brown hair in a short cut that suited her busy, active lifestyle. Her warm brown eyes seemed to reflect her gentle personality. "Coming," came an energetic reply. Seconds later, a 10-year-old boy came running down the stairs. Liam Mitchell had brown hair like his mother, and his face-filling smile was his characteristic feature. His energy for constant movement never seemed to run out, and this morning was no exception. "We're doing a volcano experiment in science club this afternoon." Liam spoke excitedly with his mouth full of pancakes. "That sounds fun. But please don't talk with food in your mouth," Eleanor gently admonished. "And don't forget, I have a publishing deadline today, so I'll be a little late. After school, you'll need to go to the after-school program." Eleanor worked as a children's book editor at a local publishing house. Her creativity and deep understanding of children's psychology made her an excellent editor. However, balancing single parenthood with a full-time job was always a battle against time. "Okay," Liam's face showed a hint of disappointment, but he quickly brightened up. "Can I take my new dinosaur book with me then?" "Of course," Eleanor smiled. Her son's insatiable curiosity was a source of pride for her. Life in Willowbrook had begun 2 years ago. Thinking about the time before that sent a small pang through Eleanor's heart. The demanding job in the big city, and the complicated relationship with her son's father, these were things she had barely spoken to Liam about. When her son occasionally asked questions about his father, Eleanor would always vaguely answer, "Your father lives far away." The truth was more complicated, but she thought a 10-year-old child wouldn't understand yet. After finishing their morning preparations, Eleanor glanced at the front yard of the neighboring house before taking her son to school. There, Tom Wilson was already busy with yard work early in the morning. "Good morning." Tom waved. He had a sturdy build and gentle gray eyes, always displaying a warm smile. "Looks like it's going to be another beautiful day." "Good morning, Tom," Eleanor smiled back. "It certainly is. Your garden always looks lovely." "Mr. Wilson, are you coming to watch my baseball practice?" Liam asked expectantly. Tom sometimes supported the local boys' baseball team and occasionally gave Liam personal coaching. "Of course, I promised, didn't I?" Tom answered kindly. "I haven't forgotten." Saturday. Tom was a retired police officer who commanded deep respect from the town residents. He had been especially kind to Eleanor and Liam since they first moved in. He lived alone, and there were rumors that he once had a daughter, but Eleanor didn't know more than that. The townspeople described Tom as someone you can rely on, often going to him with their troubles. Eleanor was grateful for his kindness. Starting a new life in a new town wasn't easy, but thanks to neighbors like Tom, she and Liam had gradually integrated into the community. "Well, we'd better get going," Eleanor waved and took Liam's hand as they headed toward the car. During her commute, she glanced at her son in the rearview mirror. Liam was looking out the window, softly singing something. His apparent happiness warmed Eleanor's heart. Yet at the same time, she felt an indescribable emotion rising within her. For the past 2 years, she had worked hard to build a new life. On the surface, everything seemed fine. A good job, nice neighbors, and most importantly, a healthy and happy son. But sometimes, especially late at night when she was alone, she would be struck by an inexplicable anxiety. A feeling as if something was waiting behind this peaceful life. "Mom, are you listening?" Liam's voice interrupted her thoughts. Sorry, honey, I was just thinking about something. Eleanor forced a smile. What did you say? Will you help me with my science fair project? Of course, she answered. What do you want to do? While Liam enthusiastically explained his ideas, Eleanor decided to cherish this peaceful moment. The past was the past, this was a new beginning. Yet sometimes her intuition questioned that tranquility. Was it merely parental worry or something else? She still didn't know. After arriving at school and saying goodbye to Liam, Eleanor drove to the publishing house. Today was the final proofreading day for a new picture book, and her mind was shifting into work mode. On a peaceful weekend afternoon, Eleanor sat on the living room sofa, absorbed in editing a children's book manuscript. Weekend work wasn't unusual for her, but she wanted to finish as quickly as possible to spend time with her son, Liam. Soft light filtering through the window brought a comfortable warmth to the room. Eleanor adjusted her glasses as she reviewed the final chapter of the story. She always emphasized the importance of an ending that would leave a lasting impression on children's hearts. The house was quiet. Liam had gone upstairs that morning saying he was going to organize the storage room and had been up there since. Eleanor encouraged her son's explorations. She believed that allowing her curious boy to investigate every corner of the house was good for his intellectual growth. Mom. At the sudden voice, Eleanor looked up from the manuscript. She heard Liam's footsteps running down the stairs and removed her glasses, preparing to greet her son. Mom, look. This came out of a strange place. When Liam appeared before her, Eleanor immediately focused on what he was holding. It was a wooden doll about 12 inches tall. A handmade, rather antiquated-looking doll. It had no clothes or hair, just simple carvings. The face had a peaceful expression carved into it, but the eyes looked strangely hollow. Where did you find this? Eleanor asked, unable to hide her surprise. In the 2 years since they had moved in, she thought she knew almost everything in the house. But this was the first time she had seen this doll. Liam had a slightly anxious expression as he said, inside the house, it was in a box at the back of the storage room. But I've never seen it before. I've cleaned the storage room before. Eleanor took the doll in her hand. The wooden surface was smooth, as if polished by years of use. When she turned the doll over, she saw small words carved into the bottom, "Forever yours." As her fingers traced over the letters, she felt her heart beating faster. I wonder who this belonged to, she murmured. Did the previous residents leave it behind? Liam stood next to his mother, staring intently at the doll. It feels strange, this doll, he said in a small voice. But it also looks kind of sad. Eleanor observed the doll again. Indeed, within the simple expression, there seemed to be an emotion that couldn't be expressed in words. She realized there was much she didn't know about the house before they moved in. The real estate agent had only told her it had been vacant for a long time. Hey, Mom, Liam's voice interrupted her thoughts. I think this doll moved just now. Eleanor's eyes turned to Liam. What do you mean? When I took it out of the box, I thought its fingers moved. Liam said without confidence. Maybe it was just my imagination. At that moment, Eleanor felt a strange coldness in the hand holding the doll. It was different from the coolness of wood, something that seemed to seep deep into her bones. A chill ran down her spine. Suddenly, a strange image flashed in her mind. A dimly lit room. Unfamiliar family photos hanging on the walls. And the same doll she was now holding, sitting on a bed. It wasn't her memory, but rather as if a fragment of someone else's memory had flowed into her. This doll doesn't belong to us, Eleanor's voice was trembling. She stood up and firmly took her son's hand. Put your coat on. We're leaving right now. What's wrong? Liam looked confused, but noticing the change in his mother's expression, he silently obeyed. Eleanor grabbed only her wallet and put the doll in a brown paper bag. She felt an inexplicable fear. Her intuition was screaming, "This doll is dangerous." The two left the house without looking back and jumped into the car. Eleanor's hands were shaking slightly, but she tried to maintain her composure. She didn't want to show her fear to her son. "Where are we going?" Liam asked in a small voice. "To Martha's," Eleanor answered. Martha was the first friend she had made in this town and worked at the local library. "There's something I want to ask her about." As she drove, Eleanor kept checking the paper bag on the back seat. She couldn't shake the strange feeling that the doll was watching her. 15 minutes later, they arrived at Martha's house. Martha Collins was a warm woman in her 50s who knew the town's history well. She opened the door with a surprised look. "Eleanor." "Liam." "What's wrong? You seem so rushed." Eleanor took the doll out of the paper bag with trembling hands. "Liam found this in our house. But it's not ours, and..." She continued, choosing her words carefully. "It just feels strange." Martha's expression changed when she saw the doll. She took it and examined it carefully. "This seems familiar," Martha said slowly. "I think I've seen it somewhere." At her words, Eleanor's heart began to beat rapidly again. "What do you mean?" Eleanor asked, feeling breathless. "Where did you see it?" Martha slowly rotated the doll, furrowing her brow. The afternoon spring light streamed through the window, casting subtle shadows on the wooden doll's surface. "I believe it was at a children's event at the community center. Last fall, perhaps." Martha narrowed her eyes, trying to remember. "Tom had it. He was showing it to the children." Eleanor couldn't hide her surprise. "My neighbor Tom." Martha nodded. "He said it belonged to his daughter. He mentioned something about it being a family keepsake." Eleanor was confused. She had heard that Tom had a daughter, but she didn't know the details. However, what occupied her mind more was the question of why this doll was in her house. "But why would this be in my house?" she thought aloud. "Liam found it at the back of the storage room. We've cleaned there before." Martha chose her words carefully. "You're quite close with Tom, aren't you?" "Yes." Anxiety spread through Eleanor's heart. "He's always kind. Especially to Liam." "Mom," Liam quietly tugged at her sleeve. "Is Mr. Wilson a bad person?" Eleanor quickly smiled at her son. "No, I'm sure there's an explanation for all this." She said it as if trying to convince herself. But deep down, her uneasiness was growing. "Maybe you should contact the police," Martha suggested. "Just to be safe." After thinking for a moment, Eleanor nodded. She turned to Liam with a calm voice. "Liam, would you mind playing with Aunt Martha for a bit? Mom needs to make a phone call." Liam didn't seem to fully understand the situation but nodded. After he went to another room with Martha, Eleanor called the local police station. However, her concerns weren't taken seriously. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm sorry, but a doll being in your house isn't evidence of breaking and entering." The young officer's voice was sympathetic but firm. "It might have been left by previous occupants, or your child might have brought it in from outside." "But I've learned this doll belongs to my neighbor," Eleanor explained. "And it appeared in our house without our knowledge. Still, without physical evidence." The officer's voice trailed off. "If there's a direct threat or clear evidence, we'll respond immediately, but..." After hanging up, Eleanor let out a deep sigh. The police wouldn't help, at least not in the current situation. She returned to Martha's living room. Liam was watching TV, and Martha was preparing tea in the kitchen. "How did it go?" Martha asked. As expected, Eleanor smiled sarcastically. "They said there's not enough evidence." While drinking tea with Martha, she considered her next move. Her intuition told her something was wrong. This wasn't a mere coincidence. There must be a reason the doll appeared in her house. And she needed to know that reason. "I'll investigate it myself," Eleanor resolved. "I'll gather evidence." "What are you going to do?" "First, I'll install security cameras at home," she began explaining her plan. "Then, I'll deliberately tell Tom that I'm going away for a few days." The next day, Eleanor purchased security cameras as planned and installed them in the living room and at the entrance. The cameras were set to transmit footage to her smartphone. Once everything was ready, she approached Tom, who was working in his garden. "Hello, Tom," she greeted him with her usual cheerful voice. "Hi, Eleanor." Tom stopped weeding and showed a smile. "Another beautiful day, isn't it?" "Yes, indeed," she agreed and casually continued. "Actually, from Thursday to Sunday next week, Liam and I are going to my sister's house. A little family gathering." "I see, that sounds nice." Tom's eyes shone kindly. "I hope you enjoy yourselves. Let me know if there's anything I can help with." "Thank you. Actually, it would be helpful if you could water my plants," Eleanor suggested as planned. "Especially the houseplants in the living room that need water every day." "Leave it to me," Tom answered immediately. "I still have the spare key." Eleanor smiled, but inwardly she was tense. Last year, when she went on a week-long business trip, she had asked Tom to look after the house and given him a spare key. After she returned from the trip, he said he had returned the key, but "That's a big help. Thank you." That Thursday, Eleanor made a show of preparing for the trip where Tom could see them. But in reality, she and Liam were heading to Martha's house, where they would secretly monitor their home. Martha's house was positioned across the street with a view of Eleanor's house, making it a perfect surveillance point. She explained to Liam that they were having a special sleepover at Martha's, which delighted him. "Are you sure about this?" Martha asked worriedly. "If he really is." "I need to know," Eleanor said with determination. "I want to be free from this anxiety." Nothing happened that night. Eleanor checked her smartphone screen repeatedly, but the house remained quiet. However, the following evening, an alarm sounded, and footage appeared on her smartphone. Tom was standing at her front door, using a key to enter. Eleanor caught her breath. She showed the screen to Martha. The two watched the footage with tense expressions. Tom slowly walked around inside the house and entered the living room. He watered the houseplants, and then, he began looking around the room. The camera captured Tom examining her bookshelf, picking up photo frames. He stared at pictures of her and Liam for a long time. And most shocking of all was the sight of him entering her bedroom, touching her belongings, clothes, books, and even cosmetics. "This is..." Martha was at a loss for words. Eleanor continued watching the footage with trembling hands. Tom's behavior was clearly inappropriate. And finally, he placed a small package on the living room table before leaving the house. "Another doll," Eleanor pointed out sharply. Now she had sufficient evidence. She immediately contacted the police and showed them the footage. This time, her complaint was taken seriously. The next morning, police took Tom in for questioning and entered his house with a search warrant. What did they find in his house? Eleanor asked Detective Johnson, who was in charge of the investigation. She and Liam had safely returned home but were now waiting at Martha's house. "Some rather disturbing items," Detective Johnson chose his words carefully. "Many photographs of you. Some taken from a distance, moments when you weren't aware." Eleanor felt a shiver. "What else?" "Collections of things you presumably threw away, and..." He hesitated for a moment. "We found evidence that listening devices had been planted in your home." At those words, Eleanor felt as if her world was collapsing. She had been under constant surveillance for the past 2 years. All her private moments, conversations with Liam, her worries and hopes, all had been observed. And in his diary, Detective Johnson continued. There were repeated entries saying, "I must protect her." Protect? Eleanor was confused. From whom? We don't know yet, the detective answered honestly. Wilson is currently in custody and being interrogated. We'll let you know as soon as we have more details. Eleanor nodded, but her heart was filled with complex emotions. Fear, anger, and strangely, sadness. She had thought Tom was a good neighbor to her and a good friend to her son. Learning it was all an illusion hurt her more than she had expected. The following afternoon, Eleanor sat quietly in an interview room at the police station. A coffee was placed in front of her, but it had gone cold. When Detective Johnson entered the room, she looked up with a tense expression. "Mrs. Mitchell," Detective Johnson said as he sat down. "We've completed our interrogation of Tom Wilson. There are things you should know." Eleanor nodded silently. Various emotions were swirling in her head. Anger, fear, and above all, a sense of betrayal. The person she had trusted had been invading her life. "Wilson has confessed to everything," the detective continued. "Breaking and entering, wiretapping, and all acts that violated your privacy. He acknowledges his crimes." "Why?" Eleanor finally spoke. "Why would he do such things?" Detective Johnson opened a file and looked at his notes. "Wilson has a 30-year career in law enforcement. His specialty was domestic violence cases." Eleanor wore a confused expression. She couldn't understand how this related to her situation. According to his testimony, the detective carefully chose his words. Throughout his career, he has seen many victims of domestic violence. In particular, a case involving a mother and child that he couldn't save apparently became his trauma. Eleanor slowly began to understand. "He thought I was a victim of domestic violence." "Yes," the detective nodded. "He says he noticed the scars on your arm. And the fact that you suddenly moved to town with just your son, your reluctance to talk about your son's father, these aligned with what he considered a typical pattern of domestic violence victims." Eleanor unconsciously stroked her left arm. There were indeed scars there. But they were from a childhood bicycle accident. "Still, that doesn't give him the right to monitor me," she said firmly. "You're absolutely right," Detective Johnson agreed. "He broke the law. He himself acknowledges that." "The dolls?" Eleanor suddenly remembered to ask. "Why did he place dolls in my house?" The detective softened his expression slightly. "That might be the most unusual part of this story. Wilson did indeed have a daughter. She died in a traffic accident 20 years ago." Eleanor gasped. The doll was apparently his daughter's favorite. He treasured it as her memento. "He..." The detective hesitated for a moment, choosing his words. "He says he felt a bond with you and Liam similar to what he had with his daughter. And through the doll, he tried to protect them." Eleanor was speechless. Mixed among the fear and anger she had been feeling, complex emotions now entered. Tom's actions were wrong. However, they came not from malice but from a distorted form of protective instinct. "He will be charged with stalking and breaking and entering," Detective Johnson continued. "His lawyer has already requested a psychiatric evaluation. Likely, he will undergo therapy and a rehabilitation program." After finishing the meeting and leaving the police station, Eleanor's heart was filled with complex emotions. She had the right to feel anger and fear. But at the same time, she understood the sad story behind Tom's actions. A few days later, Eleanor began sessions with a psychological counselor. This was at the police's recommendation. She needed to face her emotions and understand how this event had affected her and Liam's lives. "Mom, what happened to Mr. Wilson?" Liam asked one evening before bed. He didn't fully understand the recent events but sensed that something serious had occurred. Eleanor sat on the edge of her son's bed and gently stroked his hair. "Tom. Mr. Wilson had some problems. He's getting help from professionals now. Was he a bad person?" Liam's eyes wavered with anxiety and confusion. Eleanor thought for a while. She struggled with how to explain the complex truth to her son. "Even good people can do wrong things, Liam," she finally said. "Mr. Wilson chose the wrong way to try to protect us. That was bad, but it doesn't mean he himself is entirely a bad person." Liam pondered this for a while but eventually nodded. "But can't we see him anymore?" "Not for a while," Eleanor answered honestly. "He needs time to reflect on himself somewhere else." Several months after that conversation, a letter arrived at Eleanor's home. The postmark was from a town she didn't recognize. When she opened the letter, there were words written in Tom's handwriting. "To Eleanor. Please allow me to write this letter. I promise this will be my first and last contact. There is no excuse for what I did to you and Liam. I sincerely apologize for betraying your trust, violating your privacy, and causing you fear. I am undergoing therapy and a rehabilitation program. I am confronting the root issues behind my actions and learning the importance of healthy boundaries. I understand how my past experiences distorted my judgment. It pains me to think of how you and Liam were hurt by my actions. I hereby vow never to contact you again. You deserve to live in peace. Please be assured, I am no longer in Willowbrook. In a new town, I am making efforts to learn from past mistakes and move forward. I will forever be sorry. Thomas Wilson." Eleanor finished reading the letter and exhaled deeply. She couldn't completely forgive Tom, but she could feel the sincerity of his apology. And with his departure from their lives, at least physical safety was assured. A few weeks after that incident, Eleanor began volunteering at a local support group for domestic violence victims. She wanted to use her experience to help others escape from fear. At the support group, she met women who had fled from real domestic violence. She listened to their stories and came to understand the differences from her own case. At the same time, she deepened her understanding of people like Tom, people whose good intentions become twisted and lead to problematic behavior. "Your story is unusual, Sarah," the group leader told her. "But that makes it valuable. It shows how sometimes control can occur in the name of protection." Eleanor nodded at those words. She felt that now, by helping others through her experience, she was also advancing her own healing. Tom's trial took place a few months later. His efforts toward rehabilitation and sincere apologies were appreciated, and he received a suspended sentence. He left Willowbrook and started a new life in another town. "I can't forgive, but I can understand," Eleanor said in her final session with the psychological counselor. "And now it's time to move forward." She had the wooden doll, the trigger for that strange incident, returned to her by the police. This time without feeling fear, she stared at it intently. The words, "Forever Yours," were still carved there. After thinking for a while, Eleanor decided to display the doll on a shelf. For her, it was a memory of past events and at the same time, a symbol of the strength she had overcome them with. A year later in spring, the town of Willowbrook was colored with cherry blossoms. Eleanor Mitchell was reviewing the proposal for a new support program in the small office of the local domestic violence support center. Light streaming through the window illuminated a picture frame on her desk, a photo of Liam's baseball team. Since that incident, many things had changed. Eleanor now not only regularly volunteered at the support center but also worked as a leader of a small team. Her calm judgment and warm empathy were valued by many. "Eleanor, you have a visitor," her colleague Jessica knocked on her office door. Eleanor looked up and saw a middle-aged man standing at the entrance. She hesitated for just a moment but quickly stood up to greet him. "Chief Parker, welcome." Chief Parker was Tom's former colleague and still worked at the local police station. He occasionally cooperated with the support center's activities. "May I have a moment of your time?" he asked politely. The two sat facing each other in the center's small cafeteria. A gentle spring breeze entered through the open window. "I have something to tell you about Thomas Wilson," Chief Parker said quietly. Eleanor gave a small nod. Hearing Tom's name no longer evoked the fear it once did. There was only a calm curiosity. "He has now completed a rehabilitation program in another town and is beginning a new life," the chief continued. "He's using his experience as a former police officer to train young officers on how to respond to domestic violence." "Oh," Eleanor's expression showed surprise. "He seems to have learned a lot from his incident with you," the chief said with a sincere gaze. "He truly understands that his actions were wrong and is trying to use that in a positive direction. In his training, he emphasizes that good intentions can sometimes lead to harmful results." Eleanor picked up her coffee cup and digested those words. "Thank you for telling me," she finally said. "If he's able to move forward, I'm glad." That evening, Eleanor sat on her porch, gazing at the setting sun. Beside her was the manuscript of a memoir she had begun writing. The title was Misunderstanding and Understanding: What We Learned. She hoped that through her experience, she could help others deal with similar situations. From a distance, she could hear Liam's voice. He was further improving his baseball skills under the guidance of a new coach. The loneliness of growing up without a father was gradually being healed by the presence of many good adults around him. "Mom, look!" Liam came running with his arms spread wide. His face shone with sweat and smiles. "Coach said my batting has improved so much." Eleanor stood up and embraced her son. "That's wonderful." As she gently stroked her son's head, she looked toward the town. There, she could see the roof of the newly built support center. In front of it was a wooden bench she had donated. She had the words "Second Chances" carved into the bench, her response to the "Forever Yours" on that doll. "Everyone makes mistakes," she whispered quietly. "But what matters is what you do afterward." The setting sun stretched their shadows long, slowly sinking beyond the horizon with the promise of a new day.